Hello.
Hello. How's it
How's
going?
Oh, good. It's Friday, last stream of the week.
Last stream of the week, last stream of this mesh week. Pretty
Yes.
excited.
I thought you were gonna say last stream ever. It's like no,
No,
no, no. Last stream for this week, last stream for the mesh week, and it's
yeah.
Unless we want to do a mesh month.
yeah.
That's
A
intense.
300.
That might burn me out. I don't know. That might be a little bit much for me. But I could, mesh weeks or CNI weeks or whatever we want to do next. We'll probably figure it out.
Of course, 2023 is the year of the service mesh, right? So it's the year of the Linux on the desktop, serverless everywhere, and service mesh.
Oh wait, Linux on the desktop. 2023 is the year of the Linux on the desktop.
Every year.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I figure like it's almost every year that I hear that, but all right. Anyway, last stream we'll talk about advanced scenarios in Istio, and I'll let Marino do his thing and take over, and I'll be quiet.
Absolutely. Okay. So let me just go slideshow. Oh, I don't want a huge slideshow. I just want a basic one. Presenter view. There we go. That looks a little cleaner. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is, again, the last session. And on the exam, there are a set of advanced topics that you're expected to be familiar with. We're not entirely sure what kind of questions you get, whether it's a specific configurational question or if it's something related to multiple choice. But we figured that it's worth taking you through a bunch of different areas of the docs and covering off some advanced scenarios where these might come up. So for example, let's look at this blueprint. So we'll go in reverse. We're actually going to look at WASM first, and then understand how it functions or what its place is in the world of Istio. Then we'll go through some troubleshoot configuration issues, because one thing you might want to assume is that you might be thrown a question, whether it might be configurational or, I don't know, multiple choice. And it's worth knowing what kinds of scenarios you might get into and how to troubleshoot, how to navigate through them. So we'll review a few. We're not going to review every single one, but through your prep for this exam, I recommend I would assume we all recommend you go through all these different scenarios. Some of them seem a little bit more advanced, so I can't expect they would show up on the exam. But familiarization, recognition, at knowing where to look is probably one of the bigger things about knowing these sections. And then we'll come back and visit the virtual machine integration, because on the exam there's a section there, understanding how to onboard non-Kubernetes workloads to the mesh. So we using Istio means that we normally would be running something like Kubernetes and running a bunch of pods backed by services, and we route those services using virtual services and ingress all of our traffic through an ingress gateway. But what about services outside the mesh that can't be containerized now, or outside of a cluster, I should say? You could actually take virtual machines, even, I guess, bare metal workloads if you really wanted to, and bring them directly into the mesh. And that involves onboarding a sidecar-like functionality onto that particular virtual machine instance through the operating system, and then some additional configurations so that it basically can communicate with IstioD as a control plane. So we'll look at a little bit of that. All right, so WASM and the functionality behind it. So in Istio, you actually have this capability to customize and use Envoy. In fact, Envoy itself is pretty much something that can offer you a full virtual machine-like experience if you wanted to, although it's not completely written as such. But the case where you might have to do some customization of your request, or you might have to transform some payload information, you can't simply do it with the regular transformations in, let's say, Istio. You might want to use WASM. So Envoy offers up a WASM sandbox where effectively allows you to run an application really quickly and at light speed, almost, you could say. Basically, it's running inside of your Envoy proxy. Now, the consideration here is and the relationship is think about eBPF, for example. with eBPF, you can run sandbox-based programs as well that won't crash the kernel. So the assumption here is that the WASM function or app that you develop and deploy it for your sidecar isn't meant to crash the sidecar in any way. So there's a number of key features and capabilities that the WASM extensibility and functionality aim to provide you with. They're all laid out here, but I won't cover them in detail. Now, just to kind of provide a visualization, there is a WASM runtime that exists in Envoy. And so you might define an EnvoyFilter configuration in Istio, and I'll show you one very briefly. And in there, you'll actually call out that you're going to run a little app based off of the WASM runtime. So as long as you have that field in there, WASM is instantiated, and now you can run your little app that might transform up a request, for example. So it's pretty extensive. Let's go take a quick peek at that documentation and see there's an example actually somewhere here. Here we go. Let's go to the extensibility, distributing WASM assembly or WebAssembly modules. So in this example, I think one of the key things to look for is that there's a WasmPlugin that's configured here. We're basically going to add basic HTTP auth into our mesh. So not that I'm going to do this, but here's a good example that you can review. There's another example somewhere else. I can't remember where it is. Let me see if I had it somewhere here. WASM extensibility. Distributing WASM modules. I don't think it's there. Istio ecosystem. Nope, that's not it. There was another example
which one? WASM one or?
Yeah, it was a WASM example that showed us an example filter and
like an EnvoyFilter or WASM?
EnvoyFilter, exactly.
Oh, okay. Just EnvoyFilter. Might be just look for EnvoyFilter probably. If you want to show how the EnvoyFilter looks like. The resource.
Let's see. EnvoyFilter WASM.
Oh, you want to show the EnvoyFilter that configures the WASM.
Yeah,
EnvoyFilter resource that configures the WASM filter in
exactly.
It's probably on the Envoy documentation, right?
No. It's in the Istio documentation actually. There is an EnvoyFilter CRD, like right here, that you can deploy and allows you to use the WASM runtime.
There you go. Yeah.
So this is a perfect example. I don't know if you'd actually have to configure this on the exam. I can't imagine you would be expected to, because it's a pretty complex piece of work. But at least knowing, where in the documentation you would look to find what an EnvoyFilter is doing, and specifically looking for the fact that, the VM config and the runtime is Envoy WASM is probably all I'd really worry about.
Yeah, it's that, and then the code section right afterwards. If we're talking about WASM specifically, right? But each one of these, like filters, has their own set of settings. So I highly doubt it would be very dynamic. It's very dynamic, and it's very hard to come up with a good question. That would. It's like, what is a C# programming language or a Golang programming question? You can come up with anything. There's so many things. For EnvoyFilter specifically, one thing that I would look at in case that is on the exam is maybe a question around, let's say you're deploying an EnvoyFilter, you want to apply it to gateways only. How would you do that, right? And there's I think it's called context field that specifies, I want to apply EnvoyFilter to the gateway only, or I want to apply my EnvoyFilter to inbound or outbound communication, right? So it's context, right? It's context. Gateway, and that context can be gateway, sidecar inbound, sidecar outbound, and all. I think I don't remember exactly, but those are one things that I would look at. The other things are I feel it would be too advanced, even for the advanced section. it might be too advanced, but documentation is there.
So it's not under the gateway section, it's under the EnvoyFilter section.
Yes.
there's not an easy way to link it, but I would just say if you link your EnvoyFilter, bookmark that one, and then scroll down and look for the gateway section.
Yeah, I think it's the patch context on the right, all the way on the right. If you click on, yeah, there you go. Sidecar inbound, sidecar outbound, gateway, right? It's telling you where to apply the specific patch, right?
Yeah.
But as I said, I don't think it's too complex.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the point. Like, we want to make sure that, well, I'd imagine the exam writers didn't want to, blow your mind during the exam and have you scratch your head for basically half an hour, losing that time.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I'd say read up on those docs, just familiarize yourself with the use cases and what WASM is offering inside of Istio, and then understand where those filters are, and then, where you could apply them to either the sidecar resource or gateway resource. Okay, so there are a number of considerations around troubleshooting Istio. So there might be situations where you are troubleshooting traffic management. You're trying to understand why one service can't communicate with another service, or why you from the outside can't communicate with a service in your mesh. And so it's always worth double checking your virtual service configuration, your gateway configuration. We'll take a look at some of this in a second. There's also the concept of observability that Istio offers through sidecars and through the ingress that tells us how apps are behaving and how they're performing. Now, sometimes the observability piece might not function, and it might be worth figuring out how to troubleshoot that. Configuration validation is a situation where you might have passed a config into Istio and it works. It doesn't work, but it's accepted. But there's a config error somewhere, and Istio wouldn't know how to do anything with it, but it just doesn't know that it's not supposed to parse it in Istio-D or pass it to Istio-D. In security, there might be situations where maybe your certificate is mismatched, or maybe you haven't implemented the right TLS mechanism, or maybe you have a double TLS or double encryption going on. So we'll go take a look at some of those specific situations. Sidecar injection, it could be a case where you might not have a label on the namespace, or you might need to re-roll out your services in order for that sidecar to be injected. And then upgrade, there isn't really much in that section, but let's go take a look and we'll see what's up. So let's start off with traffic management issues. Now, it lists out a whole bunch of issues, and I think it's best to always familiarize yourself with just where the issues are. So for example, route requests are rejected by Envoy, route rules don't seem to affect traffic flow. Let's take a look at this one. Route rules don't seem to affect traffic flow. So in the situation with the current Envoy sidecar implementation, up to 100 requests may be required for weighted distribution to be observed. If route rules are working perfectly for the book info sample, for example, but similar version routing rules have no effect on your own application, it might be that your Kubernetes services need to be changed slightly. Kubernetes services might adhere to certain restrictions in order to take advantage of Istio's layer 7 routing features. Refer to requirements for pods and services. Another potential issue is that the route rules may simply be slow to take effect. So maybe you applied your routing configuration for your virtual services, and maybe you just have a ton of configuration in there, and it just takes a while for Istio to process that and pass that information down to the sidecars. This could even be just that your cluster is overwhelmed and under resourced, and so you might need to scale up your node pools, or maybe allocate more resources as needed. Seeing 503 errors after setting a destination rule. So if requests to a service immediately start generating HTTP 503 errors after you applied a DR, and you continue, and the errors continue until you remove or revert the destination rule, then the destination rule is probably causing a TLS conflict for the service. So in this case, it says that you've configured mutual TLS globally. The destination rule also must include this traffic policy TLS mode Istio mutual. If you don't, it just basically says the mode defaults to disable, causing client proxy sidecars to send or make plain HTTP requests, unencrypted requests instead of the TLS encrypted requests. So there might be another one here. Route rules have no effect on the ingress gateway requests. So remember Peter and I were talking about this. So there's a situation where you're using an ingress gateway corresponding to a virtual service to access an internal service. For example, the service here, we're using the MyApp gateway. It's actually listening in for requests, or our requests should be coming in from myapp.com, meaning that's what we're listening into. We have a gateway configuration that probably listens in for that specific host name. And then when we receive those requests, we're going to route it to the hello world service based off of this prefix. So we just have to make sure that we append this prefix at the end here, so we know we're going to route to the hello world service. Now, there might be a subset configuration here. So for example, you might have version 1 and version 2 of hello world. And in this situation, what's actually happening is you're going to round robin to the 2 different versions. So you haven't specified a subset. You've just specified, I just want to go to hello world.default.svc. But if you look at your hello world service configuration, you actually have 2 iterations of that. So which one do you want to route to? So in this situation here, you actually would want to define your subset down here. So if you define your subset, now if you put this prefix here or append your prefix hello, it should automatically route you to version 1 of hello world. Otherwise, you may get one or the other. So it just might be a configurational rule of how you set up your destination rule. And then you have to come back here and align it with your virtual service configuration. So you're calling out the right subset, which translates to the right service version of your service. So there's a whole bunch of other errors and issues that you can run into. For example, TLS configuration mistake. So here's a classic one where you might have specified the TLS port or the HTTPS secure port 443, but the protocol you used is the plain text version of HTTP. And so this won't work. This won't allow you to connect, because while the port is expecting secure requests, you're just basically looking at it from a plain text standpoint. You're using HTTP plain text to be able to respond. So you actually have to align it to the right protocol. Make sure you're using the right protocol number, the right protocol name, and then you've even written out the name as well, and in order for this to work. Gateway to virtual service TLS mismatch. Hold on, let's see what else there are. Okay, there's a whole bunch of TLS ones. Peter, do you want to maybe talk about some of the TLS errors that we might encounter?
Yeah, let me scroll to. I'm scrolling with you here.
Oh, okay.
But that's fine. Yeah. So let's see. So the common mistakes. The gateway terminates TLS while virtual service configures TLS routing. And then the second one, the gateway does TLS pass through while the so it's just a mismatch. Let's see. So let's look at the first example. So gateway listening on 443, protocol HTTPS for all hosts, specifying a credential as well, which I think we showed right this week briefly how to do that. And then in the virtual service, what we're doing is we're listening for any .example.com, star.example.com hosts, attaching that gateway, and then trying to do a match on the same thing. And then the issue here is that the gateway already terminates TLS, right? Yep. And then doing any SNA host matching. Notice if you can highlight just the line right below that you had after the TLS thing. If you remember, like when we were doing the gateway demos, we only use HTTP in that case, right? Because we're trying to match right on the HTTP properties. But this one is using TLS. Now, because we already terminated TLS at the gateway, this one doesn't make sense anymore, right? There's nothing for you to do here, right? And you'll basically get back a 404, right? And then it does mention Istio CTL proxy config routes, just to make sure that the routes are specified. And the fix to this one is don't use the TLS, use HTTP, and then match on some other property because that's already matched, right?
Yeah.
And then the second one, what is this one doing? So this one has the pass-through mode on the gateway. I think we mentioned the pass-through. So this one is not terminating anything, at least not terminating TLS at the gateway, right? It's just saying, I'm just going to pass it through. I don't care, right? I'm not going to do the termination. And then, but in the virtual service, what we're doing is we're just using HTTP and trying to route it. And this is the other way around, right? So in this case, you should use TLS, right? Because we haven't terminated TLS at the gateway. You can match on HTTP, right? Because it's encrypted. Do it with TLS here, and then use the SNI to match it like that and route it like that, right? And then, yeah, the solution would be to basically, one of the solutions would be to terminate it at the gateway, right? So, yeah, the double TLS as well, TLS origination. Yeah, so you don't do like double encryption. So service entry, HTTPS on port 443 for HTTP bin, and then destination rule. What we're doing in destination rule, we're saying, do the TLS origination again, right? So it's like double doing it twice in a way, right? Doubly encrypted. And I think this will this work? No, it's not gonna work, right? Yeah. So the fix would be to change the port in the service entry to be HTTP instead of HTTPS. But I think the other one, that one's better, is just to change the port actually to 80 and then do the target port 443.
Yeah.
So it's gonna do, so you can, within the mesh, if you think about it, if you do curl httpbin.org port 80, in that case, what's gonna happen with this last piece of configuration is it's gonna be plain text, but then the destination rule with the traffic policy TLS mode simple is gonna originate the TLS, and from there on it's gonna go to 443, because you can also specify, I think in the service entry you can specify, yeah, we have the target port 443, right? So
exactly,
it's gonna know how to do that. So yeah, what is 404 multiple gateways? I don't think there's going to be multiple gateways. I mean, there could be, but two hosts sharing the same TLS certificate, wildcard certificates. Yeah.
I think the consideration is just make sure that everything you expect to line up, draw it out if you have to. Well, I don't know how you would draw it out on the exam because you probably don't have access to a pen and paper, but maybe they might allow you to. I think it's in the handbook what is allowed to.
I mean, you have a I'm assuming you're gonna have an editor, right? You can type something in and draw it out like that.
You could like just use like text and say this is what
ASCII, right? ASCII characters to draw it out like that, but
exactly. So yeah, go take a look at this entire section and take a look and see all the different kinds of traffic management or security related issues that you might find with traffic management. There is actually a section specifically for security. I'll bring that up in a second. Let's talk about sidecar injection. So the result of sidecar injection was not what I expected. So this might be a situation where you expect it to be injected, but something didn't happen. There might be a number of reasons why this might be the case. You deploy a pod into the kube system or kube public namespaces, and that's not allowed. It's actually ignored by Istio, so those won't get the sidecar injection at all. Or you might have a situation where your pod spec, your deployment spec has host network set to true. The sidecar model expects that you can modify IP tables so that the container itself can route through the proxy or the sidecar proxy versus having to go directly through the host network. If host network's enabled, then IP tables won't be able to be reconfigured. There might be a situation where the webhook's namespace selector is not scoped properly for the target namespace. So it's rare that this would happen, that this would ever be misconfigured, because we've made Istio in such a way that it's easy to get up and running, and then you wouldn't even have to deploy or modify the webhook configuration or the mutating configuration. but it's a place to look if something doesn't seem right in terms of how or why your pods are not getting the sidecars injected to them. Also, you can just inspect your namespaces with the get namespace -L Istio injection, which actually adds another column and then shows you which of the namespaces have been tagged for injection. But there might be other issues related to
general. The excluded namespace are defined in the mesh config, right? That's imagine there is a question: how do you exclude a namespace, right? So how would you do it at the class level? You use the mesh config Istio object to do that, right?
Oh, to exclude the namespace.
Yeah, those two, for example, the two special Kube system and what was it, Kube public?
Yeah.
Are they excluded because the way the webhook, the mutating admission controller works, or that's influenced by the mesh config configuration, right?
I think those. I'm trying to look at the code while I'm talking, but I don't know if it's configurable to like configure what you want to exclude, if that's what you're asking. And I'm not sure if these are like hard coded in there. I don't think there would be in the code, right?
What if me as a cluster admin wants to exclude as a policy, I say there's this namespace name that it will never be part of the mesh, so I'm gonna permanently cluster level exclusion of that namespace. How would you go about that?
Oh, like excluded, like completely.
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm looking. There has to be an option there. Let me see.
Right.
Docs, namespaces. Yeah, you can do the. Oh, of course, it takes me to non-existent docs. Let me see. I'm looking. I can't. I don't know from the top of my head, but there might be. Yeah. So there's a config setting called ignored namespaces. So I think you should be able to put your namespace in there. Yeah. So there's a setting called ignored namespaces, which contains kube system, kube public, kube node lease, and local path storage namespaces by default. And I think it's configurable, so you can add your own as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the ignored namespaces flag, but I can't.
I was.
It's definitely a setting of the webhook, right? So, but
might be also hard coded. To be completely honest, I mean, it is hard coded in the source code, right? Yeah. Those values are hard coded, so maybe it's not configurable, right? Let me see. I don't know. I think we can close this one. Yeah. So someone is referencing to the configuration option. I think, Marino, on that page, is there a configuration option section? It isn't, right? Because someone was referring to
no.
In one of the issues, someone is referring and saying, "Oh, we can already do this, right? We already have a document how to disable the sidecar auto injection for a namespace." But I don't think if that's mesh wide, and because I can't get to the document.
I mean, just got me curious, right? So there must be a
no. I think it should be, but I don't like looking at the code. The ignored namespaces list is hard coded, right? But I'm thinking there probably is a way to like control this somehow. Prevent injection. I mean, the answer that one could give is say, well, just don't label your namespace with that label, right? That could be the answer, I guess, because I don't see any installing the sidecar, automatic injection, controlling the injection policy. All right, so yeah, so so enable, disable. There's also a setting on the pods themselves, right, where you can, when you're creating your deployment, you can say you can add a label that says sidecar istio io /inject equals false, right? And that Istio is not going to inject anything in there. Customizing injection. Yeah, this is just the way that the injection works. But yeah, I don't see anything explicitly in the docs. But I guess the answer is don't label your namespace with.
What I found in the Helm chart is a flag called one namespace. That's the name of the flag, one namespace, which makes Istio only watch the namespace that it lives in. It's the other way around.
Oh, but those are the discovery selectors, I think, right?
Discovery selector. Maybe that's.
Yeah. I think that's the discovery selector. If I remember,
it's the discovery, but it's a bit complicated. So sorry to ask this.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, it's discovery selectors to configure namespaces for your Istio mesh. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. I mean, we did cover some excellent areas to go explore around sidecar injection failures. So definitely go take a look at this entire section here. Okay, next section, let's take a look at some security potential problems that we might have. So there might be a situation where end user authentication fails. With Istio, you can enable authentication for end users through request authentication policies. So you can follow some of these steps to try and troubleshoot this policy specification. It seems a little too advanced for what someone would have to do for the exam, right? But let's see something more practical that I would expect to see.
This one is probably the most common one.
Exactly. Yeah. So someone gives you a policy, right, and you're told to apply it, and what you're supposed to do is run a curl against maybe a service and run a get operation. And that works. And then maybe you're supposed to run a delete operation, and that also works, but it's not supposed to work. And so you have to go in and try and troubleshoot the policy. So there might be a situation where you might have to look at the authorization policy itself and see if the necessary principles are put in place or the necessary operations are put in place. Or there might be a situation where you're missing a default denial policy, right? And that's something you might just have to simply deploy altogether.
And this one, if you just scroll a little bit higher, back up, make sure there are no typos. This one, I mean, this is a valid policy, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, right? And the actual, assuming that depending on what the question is, right? The actual issue or a typo that can screw everything up, right, is just that one dash. That's it, because it changes the or and semantics, right? In this case, it's saying allow requests to /foo or from the foo namespace, but it should say allow requests to pat foo and the namespace foo. Right, so it's just that one dash before in front of the from keyword that completely changes the thing. I mean, let alone in the real world, right? Like if you make this mistake, you're all of a sudden your policy is not as restrictive as you would expect it to be. But then in the exam, you just messed it up because of a typo, right? Sorry, so that's type of, be very careful. Like small things can mean like it's make a big difference, you know, in the way stuff works in the end.
Exactly. So take a look at this section on authorization policies, just so that you familiarize with some of your personal considerations when you're assessing something that might be broken in an auth pol. Some of these other ones I can't imagine would show up, like ensuring Istio distributes policies to proxies correctly. So it says run the following command to get the proxy configuration dump for the HTTP bin workload. Check the log and verify it includes the envoy.filters.http.rback filter to enforce auth policy on each incoming request, and that Istio updates the filter accordingly after you update the authorization policy. The following output means that the proxy of HTTP bin has enabled the Envoy filters HTTP RBAC filter that rejects anyone accessing the path /headers, which, okay, here we go. That's what it's just stating in the authorization policy.
Yeah. Where is this one? Let me find this one because it's interesting. It doesn't really say what the problem is here.
Yeah,
It's
it
just saying
doesn't.
just verify Istio works the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it
Right?
just
Right. I guess maybe it's just showing to say like,
there's a way that you can verify that the policy is there.
it's actually applied where it's like it's there and it looks the way it should be. But yeah, what is the next one? Ensure
proxies enforce policies correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So this that one might be useful. The first command that you see there is to turn on more
Debug.
like a debug logging level if you wish. However, I highly doubt that that's way too in the weeds, to be doing something like that on the exam. And then it's just checking the output, verify. I guess this is verifying the same thing as above in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's example. Yeah, I guess this is a good if you want to understand how the authorization policies from Istio actually get translated to Envoy config, right?
Yeah.
And to make sure that it gets applied. So
yeah. Also, this command right here, Istio proxy config secret in the name of your service, will basically output a configuration or your certificates aligned to this particular service. So it'll help in trying to troubleshoot whether or not your actual service is authenticated, if the certificates seem appropriate and right, because this root CA cert should align to everything else in the mesh that are sidecar resources. And if it doesn't, then it almost feels like this resource might not even be in the mesh. Not that that would be the case, but worth it to go and check out and figure out what might be wrong.
I think I did a PR at some point that added the serial number or something.
Oh, nice.
I remember correctly, either added it or display it in a different format. I remember it was something like that.
So yeah, it's great you brought that up because Peter is an active contributor to the Istio open source project. So you can go follow him and see some of his contributions. Also, this command might be indicative of an expired cert, right? So take a look at the validity here. And that should give you some indication on whether or not the cert you're using is valid to the time frame or your current date on your system or where this system is running. So go take a look at the security section, validation. I don't know. Do you feel like there's any sort of things we can do with the validation troubleshooting? Because I think at this point we're looking at the webhook and seeing if it exists.
I think that the first step on the validation I would do is, not specifically for the webhook, but I don't think that I would just do Istio. Like there's an Istio CLI, validate and analyze command, right?
Mm-hmm.
That should be your first step.
Just
and that one should tell you enough information to at least point you in the right direction, right? It's gonna either tell you this is wrong or it's gonna, hopefully it's going to tell you what's wrong, but it'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah.
So this is really about config verification and validation, just to see if the commands that you're attempting to run or any of the configs for virtual services or anything you're attempting to pass actually seem to be valid. So take a look at this. I think, to Peter's point, these two will probably be your most valuable pieces right here to run through and understand. What is this one? Upgrade problems. Okay. So, in terms of upgrades, like there's Istio CTL upgrade, I think, right? Yeah. That'll just go on to proceed to upgrade your control plane, your sidecars, the gateways. Now, I would imagine that, EnvoyFilter breaking because something changed in the actual EnvoyFilter CRD is a possibility. But I don't know, Peter, what's your experience with upgrade breakage and fails?
There was one. I think there are two groups of upgrades we can think about. One is just upgrading the control plane, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that one is documented well, right? There's, if you go in the release notes, there's always a section called upgrade notes, and that specifically and explicitly tells you what to be careful if there are any breaking changes, etc. And I think this one upgrade is also talking about specifically about like changes in resources.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Like
So,
in the API, if we think about it that way.
mhm.
There was one that was, since you brought it up, I have to mention, there was one upgrade thing related to EnvoyFilter API, where I think, if I remember correctly, they didn't change, but the way that you would refer to the EnvoyFilter names, the type names, is the old way was deprecated, yet it was still left in. So you could still use it like that, but you would get a warning. And I think from 119 they started failing and throwing an error, I think. So that was one thing that you would be like, let's say you have some Envoy filters that are still using the old way of referring to some versions in the types, right? And then you upgrade, you would probably get an error there, right? But again, all of those things are in like upgrade notes that actually explain what to do. Yeah. So canonical, you have to use canonical filter names. They deprecated the use of filter name. It's not supported anymore, right? So,
Okay.
but yeah.
Yeah, this section seems overly advanced, but have a read through it just so that you familiarize yourself with where things are in the doc.
These are extremely, extremely specific things. I would glance through it, read it, right, and then if you're gonna see it in the exam, you'll probably remember it because it's so specific.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem like the observability section covers much, but they have 3 sections. No traces appearing in Zipkin when running Istio locally on Mac. I can't imagine this would show up on the exam. So
I highly doubt the exam runs on a Mac.
Yeah. Missing Grafana output. If you're unable to get Grafana output when connecting from a local web client to Istio remotely hosted, you should validate the client and server date and time match. Ooh, not that I don't know if that's the case, but you never know. Like even time and dates tend to cause problems in a lot of production style environments. Imagine like the days of Active Directory and your domain controllers were time out of sync with your other domain controllers. That caused chaos in the way your Active Directory objects would resync. So, I mean, this is why we have network time protocol that exists. Use that to kind of sync all of your devices to a common NTP server. And then there's one here, verify Istio CNI pods are running if used. Istio CNI plugin performs the Istio mesh pod traffic redirection.
Wait. How is this under observability?
I have no idea. That's why I'm like wondering, like,
there's another documentation bug for someone to go and fix.
Good first issue if you're interested.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Right. All right. Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of observability. Let's talk about the virtual machine stuff. So the virtual machine stuff are actually, there's a section on the exam that calls out onboarding non-containerized or non-Kubernetes workloads into the mesh. Can't even remember what it was called. Understand how to onboard non-Kubernetes workloads to the mesh. Okay, so that you can automatically assume we're talking about virtual machines here. So there are 3 areas or 4 areas in the docs that you probably want to take a look at to understand how VMs are onboarded into the mesh. Now, the reality is doing this by hand is very challenging. It's not easy to do. And so if you're trying to do this in production or for your production environment, maybe consider something of an enterprise offering. So let's take, for example, this, there's this example or sample app that's deployed, BookInfo, where all of this stuff is actually running in Kubernetes. The only thing that's not running in Kubernetes is this little MySQL database that's running on a virtual machine. But you notice it also has a proxy. So in the case of running virtual machines with Istio, you actually have to deploy something that allows that VM to communicate back to the Istio control plane and then allow it to participate in the data path somehow. Now, there's a couple of scenarios that you might run into trying to do this this virtual machine to mesh connection or connectivity. You might have a single network where your virtual machine itself lives on the same network as your Kubernetes cluster and has direct access to your pods, and can even route to them and connect to them. Or you might have a situation where you have multiple networks, where you have a Kubernetes cluster that lives in Google Cloud or Civo Cloud, for example, and you have virtual machines that live on premise, but you want them, or on premises, and you want them to be attached to the mesh, and so that you can take advantage of things like policy or the MTLS encryption that's available. So in order to achieve this, you actually will deploy Istio somewhere. The Istio control plane has to live in a cluster, obviously. And you'll probably run regular workloads there. But in the case of the VM, we deploy the Sidecar there as a binary that just runs natively on the OS. And it actually communicates directly back to Istio D through something called the east-west gateway that's deployed. So if you remember in regular, like when we're using Istio and we want to expose services externally, you would use an Istio ingress gateway to do so. Now, that same gateway concept we can use to expose Istio D, like Istio control plane, to this sidecar that lives on a VM. So if you think about Istio D for a second, it's not in this diagram, but let's just pretend it's somewhere in this diagram. Istio D needs to communicate. Oh, we don't even have an east-west gateway in this diagram. Let me see if I can pull up the document. I think this might be better.
Yeah, so Istio, the east-west gateway can basically plays a role.
Yeah, it plays a role
in like both scenarios, right? Single network or multiple different networks, right? Whereas in single network, it's only Istio D.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's assume that this is a cluster, a single node cluster, and then these two VMs are on the same subnet. Like I'm literally saying same subnet. So in this situation, Istio D has direct access to these particular components because, yes, it's in the same cluster, no problem there. But in order for these proxies that live on the virtual machines, these are the virtual machines that we want to be a part of the mesh, we actually have to allow us to connect into Istio D somehow. So this is that east-west gateway we have to use. And there are certain ports in which we're communicating across from the virtual machine over to Istio D in order to get configuration from it, understand some of the names through DNS, for example, of the different services that exist. So all of that gets relayed back to this proxy. So it knows about it. It doesn't have to be manually defined anywhere. And so that way this service here can communicate with anything here, and then vice versa, we could do the same. But there are a few artifacts we have to think about. Actually, there's even another situation where, oh, dang. Another situation where you might be doing multiple networks. And although it might look the same, the only difference here is that these two VMs might be on a different subnet. And the key aspect here is routability. So can these virtual machines route to the east-west gateway? Does it have IP reachability? Because we need to ensure that, right? We need to be able to reach that. So it might be a load balancer service. So as long as it's reachable somehow, this could even be relayed through BGP if you wanted to. And this actually might be a situation. Imagine if you're running like an internal private production network, how do you relay your service IPs to the rest of your legacy network? There are a few ways. Like you could manually start injecting static routes here, but something like BGP as a routing protocol can relay those networks or those service IPs out to the rest of your network. So now your virtual machines know where the service IP of this ingress gateway is, or I should really say east-west gateway is. So it has a network path. And because it has a network path, it can now get instruction from Istio D, and then it can be as if it's a part of the mesh. So it have a certificate issued to it, and it can authenticate with other services, have MTLS going in between the service here and that service over there. But I mean, in order to achieve that level of network connectivity, you're messing with lower level network protocols. So you might be looking at a CNI like Cilium to help with that. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So if we look
one thing that I just want to say that it's the big in the multi-cluster scenario, multi-network scenario or different networks, both Envoy proxies get their configuration or connect to Istio through the east-west gateway.
Exactly.
And also the workloads themselves, right? The proxies, when they're communicating with other services, go through the east-west gateway. Whereas in the single network scenario, the east-west gateway is only used for the proxies to connect to Istio to receive configuration. And the actual pods go directly, right? They have the, because there's direct IP.
There's a direct path, exactly.
Yes, yeah. So that's the key difference here.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's a
I mean, not the difference. That's the common denominator, and those are the two scenarios. Yeah. In both cases, configuration always goes through the east-west gateway, but the pods go either through east-west or directly, right?
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So there are two key resources that we should probably be aware of. One is called the workload group resource, and it basically is similar to a deployment in Kubernetes. So basically, you're treating a common set of VMs as a grouping, and they have certain attributes. So we might want to apply policy to that workload group or have some specific access to that workload group. Now, there's also something called the workload entry, which is a more specific definition of a virtual machine. So you might have multiple workload entries that are associated to a workload group, but that workload entry is a representative of a virtual machine. So you see this MySQL virtual machine here, that would be considered a workload entry. Now, to get this up and running is actually kind of interesting and a little bit, I don't know how to say it, a lot of work. It's not a little bit of work, it's a lot of work. So let me just pull up my terminal. I can show you a little bit of what I've been doing or what we attempted to do. And we follow the instructions exactly to a T. Nothing was deviated from in any way. We just realized that there's some bug somewhere, probably at the app level, or maybe, I don't know, in the cloud provider that we're using.
I would say cloud provider level, probably.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to re-replicate this on another cloud by chance?
No, I haven't. But I'm like, not that I want to push a certain cloud, but I know it works on a certain cloud for sure because I did it there. It just doesn't work on this one, right? For whatever reason, but we could always like ping them and have them figure it out. Why isn't it working? It should work. It should work, and it actually does work in a way. The control, the proxy is able to connect to the control plane. The proxy on the VM is able to connect to the Istio running in the cluster. It's just the workloads we're not able to get the workloads to communicate in both cases, right? Single network and multi-network. It just doesn't seem to. So there might be something at the infrastructure level that they're doing that doesn't jive well with.
It's possible. Yeah. Very possible. Okay. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up before I got into the VM stuff. There's something called DNS proxying. So imagine this for a second. You don't have a DNS server that's going to tell you about all of the services that live inside of your Kubernetes environment. So you need something that'll tell you how to get to a particular resource. So Istio actually offers up DNS proxying. So in the situation where we have a VM that needs to know about services that exist, we're not going to manually go into etc hosts and create all of those service entries or those entries for where those services live and then the associated IPs. Actually, Istio will tell us that for us. And so it uses DNS proxying to be able to do so. So read a little bit more about it, but let's take a look at installing. We're not going to do the book info one. There's actually another one called installation, which I can't seem to find. Oh, here we go. Go right here. So there's a virtual machine installation guide where it's very misleading because you're not actually installing a virtual machine in this article. You're actually using a virtual machine that you provision through your own means.
Bring your own virtual machine type of thing.
BYOM, exactly. Bring your own machine. Bring your own VM. And then what the article is really doing is helping you onboard the VM into the mesh. So what we would have to do here is we'd have Istio somewhere downloaded onto our terminal. So I have it here. Istio CTL, it's good to go. I'll show you things that I have configured so I don't have to reconfigure everything. But I have Istio installed. I also have a virtual machine over here, right? If I do an ifconfig, please don't try to hack my system. I'll probably turn it off after the stream, so you won't have much luck. But I have a virtual machine here that's running Ubuntu. It's got an IP address on the inside. It's got an external IP as well. And then I'm going to show you some additional things in a second, but we'll come back to this momentarily. So what this guide wants us to do is just basically prepare the environment with a bunch of variables. So you could pretty much use any name you want here, or any directory you want to specify. And as you follow this, it'll actually create the artifacts for you using the variables you specified. So for example, we're creating a working directory where our certificates are going to be stored that Istio spits out for us that we have to issue to the VM. So because we have to find it up there, when we spit this out, the directory gets created. Now, we don't want to install Istio CTL or Istio using Istio CTL here. I made this mistake initially. I jumped the gun and I had to go back and uninstall it using Istio uninstall -- purge. And that effectively just removes Istio from your cluster. And then you just rerun through this actually with the Istio operator configuration. So you don't have to manually define your cluster name and cluster network here because it was defined up here. So as long as you're doing this from the same system where you created those variables, things should be good. Now, when I went on to create the next option or follow the steps for the next option here, I originally used default and I realized this might have caused me more problems. So I decided to use the automated workload entry creation. So what this effectively is doing is taking this it's taking this, where is this VM cluster YAML coming from?
Oh, it's the resource that you like create once.
Oh yeah, this one up here.
Yeah.
So it's actually taking the this YAML definition for Istio, the Istio operator, and applying that on the Istio CTL install. It's just taking a lot of these parameters and sorry, I missed that line there. I'm like, what the hell? Anyways, and it's just setting some values for pilot, for auto registration of the workloads, and it's also enabling health checks as well. So the moment you run this, effectively it installs Istio, and then you have to proceed to go on to deploy this east-west gateway. So let's take a look at this east-west gateway configuration for a second. If you have the Istio CTL binary installed and you change the directory to the Istio 1.19 folder, it'll actually have all of this configuration there, so you don't have to go in and create it yourself. But it's actually going on to create an Istio east-west gateway, and it'll actually spit out some specific ports that it's connecting on or listening in on. This east-west gateway is interfacing with the virtual machine's Sidecar proxy that we're going to deploy momentarily. So after this east-west gateway has been deployed, we can take a look at what it spits out. I actually have one deployed over here. So if we do a kubectl get gateway, actually, let me just do a -n. Istio system get gateway. I think I called it Istio D gateway -o. Actually, let's just do this. Let's just get gateways. I just want to see the gateways that are there. So we have the Istio D gateway. This is our east-west gateway that we're using in our situation. So if I rerun this command and did an OYAML, notice here, it's called Istio D gateway, meaning it's actually allowing my sidecar at the VM level to communicate through this ingress or this east-west gateway, which is just a gateway resource, on these ports to talk to Istio D. So this is effectively allowing me to communicate securely through to Istio D and then capture configuration parameters for the sidecar. So that's how we learn about other services. So DNS is there. This is how we learn about where these services exist and how to connect to them. A whole bunch of things Istio D relays back to the sidecar itself.
Yeah. So that first port, the 15012, is the basically Envoy's discovery services, right? That are exposed or implemented by STOD, and then when the proxy starts up on the VM, it's gonna call through this port to get the certificate and everything it needs, get the configuration, right? And also notice you see the TLS mode is set to pass through, meaning that the proxy on the VM and the STOD, right, will do mutual TLS, and this east-west gateway is just there to wave them through, I guess, wave the request through because it's passed through. Yeah,
exactly. So we've got the east-west gateway deployed, and then there's also a configuration here to expose the gateway through a virtual service configuration and gateway configuration. So as long as you have this virtual service configured, which I should have, so if I do a kubectl get, yes.
Can you just make the fonts a little bit bigger when you get a chance? Oh, perfect. Yeah.
So that virtual service here is basically just routing us directly to STOD. So
yes. Yeah. And this goes back to when we were talking about gateways and routing and everything, right? It actually shows you what happens here, right? For all hosts, we're attaching that STOD gateway, and then we're doing TLS match, right? Remember, because it's passed through, right?
Mhm.
We haven't terminated TLS at the gateway, matching on that specific port for all SNI hosts and just routing to STOD basically. And the bottom one is doing the same, just matching on the port and routing to port 443, right?
Exactly.
So it's fairly straightforward, right? There's once you know how to read this thing, it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, is that better on the screen for the?
Yeah, I think the terminal might be too small.
Better.
Better for me if anyone else can post a comment or something and say if it's too small.
I mean, the nice thing is we're doing this in HD, so or full HD. So maybe if folks want to blow it up on a big screen, it might be.
I mean, if it's Friday, right? Friday night, right? You're gonna put it on your big screen TV, and you're gonna
go hard on that Istio
You're
exam.
gonna watch the VM onboarding session.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. So I actually have a namespace created. If I get my NS, I actually called it Hello VM in my situation. You can see I created it 6 hours ago, and I created a service account for that VM itself. So in this namespace, I might actually create a VM in the future that would live external to the cluster, but be a resource here that Kubernetes understands if we really wanted it to. Now, that might be the situation where I actually have deployed something to that VM. So in the case of that diagram I showed you earlier on, if we go back here, and this is a VM, right? I deploy a service, and this would be a VM object inside of Kubernetes, or it would look like a VM object in Kubernetes. So let's go back to the docs again. So we've got our namespace there. We have our service account created. And here's where we're going to create a workload group YAML and pass that along to Istio CTL, because Istio CTL gives us a bunch of certs and tokens and mesh config information to pass to the sidecar. So all I would do is just run this because I've already got my environment variables. And then I'd call on this. Oh, let me tell you one thing. So you can actually set up a probe here, a readiness probe if you want to. We're not doing it for the sake of this example, but it's there if you want to use it. Now we're going to use Istio CTL X workload entry, and it'll generate a bunch of files. So in fact, when I ran it, our token's probably expired by now, right?
Probably, yeah.
So I could just rerun it again, and that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to rerun it, but yeah, it's just a bunch of files. And there's not that much information in these files, to be completely honest. It's just the stuff that Envoy proxy that's going to run on VM needs to know and has to have in order to connect back to STOD, right?
Yeah. So my
working directory is probably messed up.
Set that up again. Hold on. It was slash project, actually. Slash VM integration. If I rerun that command, it's a read-only file system.
Just do pwd slash project slash. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so now if I go into actually CD projects, VM integration, and ls-l, just so that we can verify that these things were created very recently. Notice that it was made at 13:06, which is 1:06 p.m. my time. So this exactly happened just now. But notice the files that it outputted. So we actually have to take these files and copy this over to our virtual machine now as part of the onboarding effort. So I'm going to do a Control R because this is a nice little neat command that Peter showed me earlier, but I don't seem to have it.
You have to set the history or something as well.
Yeah. So it's because I had another terminal, but that's fine. So I will type in SCP
-R, and then I think if I remember from my command line, there was something I never know the SCP commands.
Yeah, I can't remember it either.
See, SCP -R star if you're in the same folder, and then name of the your VM.
R.
Yes, and then you do root at or whatever your VM is.
Yeah, root at. Copy this one.
And then you can do :/root just to get it in the root folder there as well, I think.
Yeah, so what I will do is, because my stuff is over here.
Oh, you have a password, right? You don't have the SSH key.
Yeah, so I have to SSH manually into my system, and I'm glad.
I mean, you can try flashing the password and see how fast someone starts mining Bitcoin or something, if that's still popular. I don't know.
Well, I got what I needed across, so I'm all good to go. But because I have my password here, I'm going to SSH back in here, and we're going to validate that. Okay, so all of our stuff is there. Now, what we would want to do, because everything else is copied over, I don't really need to copy everything over. The thing I care mostly about in my situation is, and you would still follow all of this. The one that I care about most is just copying this file over. So.
Yeah. So the token, the Istio token file is the initial file or initial token, whatever you want to call it, the thing that the Envoy proxy uses to actually get a certificate back from Istio, right? This is the initial thing that it uses to exchange it for an actual certificate. And this one has a 1 hour expiration time, right? So if you're doing all this and then you copy everything over and then, I mean, you go and get coffee or whatever, right? An hour passes and you're wondering why your Envoy proxy isn't connecting. It might be because your token expired and it can't it can use it to replace it or exchange it for an actual certificate, right?
Yeah. So I already have Istio running. So if I do a sudo systemctl status Istio, it's there, but I'm going to just restart it because I want to have it pick up the new token.
I mean, honestly, in this case, it would probably work because you did it once and then you also
auto mount, right?
It already brought back the certificate, right? And then that certificate is there for even if you reboot the VM, right? So it keeps working. It doesn't expire like that, right? Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
So we know that the VM is now onboarded into the mesh and it's a part of the mesh and whatnot. And you can see that through the exchange of messages going on here. What's one line that would really guarantee and confirm that this is working? Probably this one right here.
Yeah, I mean, just not seeing any errors here.
Yeah.
But note on the first time you do it, like we did this before, so you already had the certificate, right? If you look at one of those lines, it is saying that, oh, using CA with certs from that etc certs root cert folder, right? Now, first time you're running it, you're not going to have those certs, right? You're only going to have that token. But proxy will still try to go and check, are there any like certs in this folder? And it might give an error because there are no certs, but then it's going to use the token to get the certs down, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but if you don't see any errors at the end, you see the push request, right? And the other thing that you could do probably is you can run, I think, Istio CTL proxy config or something, or proxy status. And you should see, I think, something there, right? If you do proxy step PS, right? Or this, yeah.
Yeah, so you do see the VM.
Yeah, there you go, right? So it is, the VM is, and it says synced, right? So it's just telling you that it is connected to STOD and it did receive the configuration.
Exactly. So it is all good. There's a couple of more things that need to be done too. So I'm not going to do it, but I've already done it. If you actually look at the cat etc/hosts, look that I've actually took the east-west gateways public IP and created an entry for IstioD so we can tell our system where IstioD is located, so that it flows traffic through that east-west gateway for picking up configuration.
Yeah. Proxy uses istio.istio-system.svc to connect to the control plane. So this is just so it knows what to resolve it to, right?
Yeah.
And I think you could, I don't want to derail the demo, but I think you could run, get the proxy, the Envoy config on the VM side as well. So you should be able maybe to see the configuration of the proxy on the VM, and it should contain the information, same/similar information that proxies or workloads in the cluster do. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I have the Hello World app already deployed. I will be very upfront and honest that even though everything here is set up and correctly and working as we expect it to, in fact, if I did a kubectl get workload entries-a, even our hello VM with an IP that we learn about is there. So it is there. But one consideration is, like, if I try to run that curl, that's not the correct command. So let me just copy this one.
You know what would be fun if this now magically starts to work, but it won't.
Yeah, it's not going to work. So
like if you do -v, it actually does resolve it to the correct IP address as well.
Yeah,
right?
So that IP address 1043.198.247 is actually the cluster IP of Hello World, or the service IP on the inside. So, it's resolving correctly, which tells me that DNS is working exactly how we expect it to in the mesh. But from the VM's perspective, I just don't know why it's not connecting. And, even Peter tested this out on his system, same setup, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Now, this could be cloud provider related. Don't want to call out any specific clouds in the way they've set up their networking. In my instance, I'm using Civo Cloud, so that could be the case.
I don't want to call out anyone specifically.
It could be the case. Civo Cloud is a great cloud environment to use.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It could be something on the networking side that's not allowing me to have these connect. And I just don't have that level of access into that networking to see what's going on. All I can do in Civo Cloud is create a network. I don't have the ability to modify it in any way. Just create a network object and have my VMs and my Kubernetes clusters land on that same network. So my node IPs are in the same network as this VM IP. That's all I can do.
Yeah. And we actually tried, right? We tried running a Python web server on the VM, and we're able to access that workload from within the cluster through the IP address, right? And it works fine. So the connectivity is there. They are in the same network and everything. It's just, it feels like they're either, I don't know, doing something like when the requests are going out and capturing it and redirecting it somewhere else first. I don't know. but it somehow it just doesn't reach the.
I mean, we know that Istio is working. There's a few commands that we can run through and see what might be going on.
Can you just a thing? So Istio D is exposed via the ingress gateway, right?
Yeah.
The east-west.
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 But could you theoretically also expose it through a node port?
Well, but why would you do it through?
Just in this case, to see if you can reach it through node port.
But I don't think that's an issue because we are able to go. I don't think it's an east-west gateway issue, honestly, because it is able to connect, right? Like this, we are able to connect through the east-west. The proxy is able to connect to the control plane through the east-west gateway, right? It's just, I don't know why it's not like we can't connect. Like the IP address should work, directly if we do the IP address.
Yeah, IP level, like layer 2, layer 3, they're okay.
Yeah. And then over here, there's configuration here. You might want to open it in an editor if you want to look at it, but I don't think if you do trace route, right, as we did, you'll see that there's something in between, some gateway or something where the request is being sent to. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe we can have someone from Civo like ping them and say, "Hey, what's happening here?"
So even looking through all of this, a lot of it looks good. So I can't imagine it's something on the configurational side of it. And we, how delicate setting up virtual machines on Istio is. I mean, we followed every single step. So there's something. Maybe it's the app. I don't know. Maybe we try a different app another time. But if you follow the same procedures, you would be fine. Now, what should I care about on the exam mostly? Let's go back and look at the architecture section. So I would say it's worth knowing the differences between single network and multi-network and how the traffic flows, what the east-west gateway is used for primarily, and how it exposes Istio D to workloads that are outside of the actual cluster, virtual machine workloads, so that the sidecars you deploy on those virtual machines have a way to communicate back to Istio D and capture config from Istio D. There are two resources that we care about: the workload group resource, which is a definition of multiple virtual machines. So they're grouped together, similar to a deployment. And then we also have the workload entry, which is a specific definition of the virtual machine itself. So, I actually am curious around trying something. Like we've got maybe 10 minutes that I just want to try.
By the way, I did look through the configuration of the Envoy proxy on the VM, and it has all the configuration about the workloads in the cluster, right? So it knows about them. It's just for some reason it can't reach them. I don't know why, and it should be through the IP address. It should be able to reach them. Right?
So Istio D can push the configuration to that Envoy on
yes.
the VM.
That. Yeah. So it is connected. We would have to debug it, and I don't think we have the. I think it might be something on the infrastructure side, but I'm again not blaming anyone, not saying that that's an issue, but
I just want to change the address for fun. Let me just see what happens.
Oh, you want to do the public one or something?
Yeah. I have to go look at my Civo Cloud config. Okay, we edited it. Let's see.
Oh, you did? Yeah. To the public IP?
Mm-hmm. Okay, dang it. Okay, so it has a new address. Now, if I go to my VM, Control R, curl.
But it's not, yeah. I don't know. Well, let's see. Let's see what happens. No, it's I think it's the other way around. It's failing, right?
Yeah.
Somehow it doesn't know.
Yeah.
One thing. Oh, I'm trying one thing as well, and maybe cd host. So I'm thinking if we add a entry in the hosts file that says, "Oh, resolve this hello world whatever," to that east-west gateway IP address, but I don't think you should have to do that, right?
Just going to add one more bullet point for y'all too, so that when you get access to this deck, you can at least also have this link to handy to have. But yeah, so I think that gives you a good sense of what to expect for the advanced scenarios. It's always worth reading the documentation, knowing about how WASM works inside of Istio and what it's doing. I don't think you'd ever have to go in and configure a WASM EnvoyFilter or anything, but probably know a little bit about it. And then troubleshooting, there's a bunch of different scenarios that you can run into. So familiarize yourself with some of the more common ones you would expect to see based off of actually previous sections that you learned. So it's obvious if you go look at the traffic management section, we covered it across 2 days. The first day, a lot of theory, and then the second day, some of the hands-on stuff. You would probably be focusing your troubleshooting efforts around some of those things you've seen outside of some of the more advanced stuff you'd see under traffic management. Anyways, go take a look at a lot of these sections, familiarize yourself, know where things are, and at least know where to look so that when you're on the exam, you could quickly look up something faster than you would if you had to just type in it in the search bar. And then with running VMs with Istio, the key considerations are really around the fact that you're using either a single network or multi-network. You're going to use an east-west gateway so that your sidecar that you deploy for your VM has a way to communicate with Istio D through that east-west gateway and is able to capture configuration and learn about other resources. And then there are 2 CRDs to be aware of, the workload group and then the workload entry resource. All right, well, that brings us to the end of Mesh Week and the end of this session. Peter, Alessandro, anything that you'd like to add? I'll stop sharing, actually.
No, I mean, I hope it was useful for everyone who was following every day and everyone else who's going to watch it later on YouTube channels or all the places where we stream this to. I hope it was useful. I think it was definitely a lot of information, right? But yeah, hopefully you use it, prepare for the exam. Feel free to reach out, right?
So where to find us, of course, and where to get more help. So there are many. The community and the Istio community is a bit scattered, right? So there is the Istio official Slack, right? So it's a great place to ask questions. There's all the original committers and the people who actively contribute to it. As Solo, we have our own Slack, a public Slack, slack.solo.io, right? So or solo.io/Slack, where you can join. You can find definitely me, Peter, and Marino active there. And it's a great place to ask Istio question for sure, and also our product. There's an Istio channel on the CNCF Slack. Also, it's not that popular. I mean, we always redirect them to other hours or Istio Slack. So you can continue learning, right? So it's not just it definitely takes more than a week to master Istio, or more than a month or a year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I hope we didn't give a wrong impression to people that, oh, if I only go through these videos, I'll be able to pass the certification or whatnot. I think use this as a like a starting point maybe as well.
yeah, that's
but
the
yeah.
idea. Okay.
The last thing I'll just bring up is that
I'm gonna have a beer or so.
So I'll probably just quickly bring this up here. Mesh Week is inside of a repo. And I think Alessandro, not Alessandro, Peter, you've been updating it, I guess.
I actually just updated the first one. I haven't had the chance to add the other stuff because a lot of things that we went through are more or less links, right? To
So our links to our PDFs, our presentations, will upload as PDFs here into GitHub.
Yeah, maybe we just generate one and just upload one.
Yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Merge everything together so people don't have to worry about too many files. But in terms of like the demos and stuff that we did, there wasn't anything really like
earth-shattering, like in terms
of like it's always on istio.io. So I think just if we just add references to the things, like links to different sections that we talked about, I think that's more than enough for people.
Yeah, I mean, all of your YAMLs, if you download the Istio CLI, all the YAMLs are there. So everything you need is there. It's just knowing the instructions and what to do and how to apply them is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just want to say, Peter, and Alessandro, has been fantastic doing these streams with you all the week long. It's fun, getting deep into some of the nitty-gritty hands-on stuff, learning a lot, learning things I didn't know. I'm sure a lot of the folks here in the audience that are watching probably didn't know a lot of the things that we covered as well. So it probably might be a first time for them. I will also say that, if you're studying for the ICA, don't, rely on this as a single resource. The documentation is there. Familiarize yourself with concepts there. Head over to academy.solo.io to take some more specific workshops around the intro to Istio, which actually will give you a good basis and foundation for understanding some of the more specifics in the exam as well. So go check that out. And yeah, like Alessandro said, continue the conversation with us.
Yep. Always available to help everyone.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Everyone enjoy their Fridays and their weekends, and we'll see you in like Twitter, Slack, wherever, conferences.
And stay tuned. I mean, we might be coming up with something else very soon that will definitely be heavily tied to this and the Istio Certified Associate. So watch out for some news there.
Yes, for sure. All right. See you all.
Thank you
Take
guys.
care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.